Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. It was a long time ago that I told you that I think Spanish literature is criminally underrated and that I wanted to do something about that. The result of that was my video on the Song of the Cid, and this video is a kind of a continuation of that. So one genre in which Spanish literature excels is the theater. Many readers don't know that. Many readers also forget that there was once something called the Siglo de Oro, or the Golden Age of Spanish theater. And I think the best example of that golden age is Pedro Calderón de la Barca's La vida es sueño, or Life is a Dream. This happens to be one of my favorite plays ever, and that's one of the many reasons why I would like to tell you about it. Here is my Spanish edition, and we will talk a little bit more about this. First of all, let me give you some quick information about the author. Pedro Calderón de la Barca was born in the year 1600 and he passed away in the year 1681. He is considered to be the next important playwright after Lope de Vega, who, by the way, admired Calderón de la Barca very much. He was a soldier, and in the year 1651 he became a priest, so he had a very interesting personal life. He made a huge impact on the Romantic movement, especially in Germany, where it began, but then also in other places of the world. For example, in England, where he was admired by such great poets as Lord Byron and Percy Shelley. Then, in a different context, Boris Pasternak translated many of Calderón de la Barca's works into Russian. So that's just so that you can have some idea about who the author was. Now, the play itself, Life is a Dream, was published in 1636. It is a 3-act play. It has 41 scenes and 3,319 lines of poetry. It is a very brief text, okay? 120 pages only. It's equivalent in my Spanish edition and in the English one. The meter is varied, so you get lots of different things, but primarily what you find here is octosyllabic lines of poetry. As you may know, in Spanish we count meter by counting the syllables, not by beats as you do in English. And then the rhyme. The patterns also vary throughout the play, but you see a lot of the ABBA type of pattern, so that's something there that is present and that recurs as you read this text. So I'm going to tell you now a little bit about the plot and the characters. The story is set in Poland, and at the very beginning we have the character of Rosaura, who is a Russian noblewoman. She arrives in Poland accompanied by Clarion, who is a clown. He is the one who introduces the element of comedy into this very serious play. So all of a sudden they notice that there's a castle nearby, and they come upon a tower that is a prison. And when they get to this place, they find a wild-looking man inside this prison. This is none other than Segismund, one of the protagonists of the play, or one of the main characters. So this guy, Segismund, has been imprisoned his entire life. He has only seen one person until this moment, when Rosaura and Clarion arrive. And it turns out that Segismund is in fact the son of King Basil of Poland, who imprisoned his son in this tower because there had been prophecies that Segismund was going to become a huge, horrible tyrant. So when the play begins, King Basil decides to give his son Segismund a chance. He says, okay, I'm going to let him rule, I'm going to let him become king, and let's see if those prophecies were correct or not, just to be on the safe side. So it's kind of a benefit of the doubt type of thing. Now here's the really interesting part. Segismund is drugged so that if the experiment goes wrong, then he can be put back in the tower, and he's going to think that his whole experience as a king was just a dream. I mean, is this an amazing premise or what? I absolutely love this story. Now, there are some huge themes going on in Life is a Dream, and that is one of the many reasons why it has become so important with the years and why it has stood the test of time. So one of them that is often cited, and probably the first one that people who have read the play are going to tell you about, is the dichotomy of fate versus free will. I think that is obvious in this play, right? Do the prophecies mean anything? The presence of these prophecies and just the effort of these characters to thwart them put me in the mind, for example, of Oedipus Rex. So you can see there are some very important connections with other important plays. That's another thing about Life is a Dream, that it is in dialogue with some great works that belong to the canon. Another important theme is, of course, power. We are dealing with kings and people who get the opportunity to rule. So power and what it does to people. And because of that, through that theme of power, another play that I thought of was Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. It's not one of Shakespeare's most famous plays or most widely read ones, but it's also about a character that gets the opportunity to rule, and we see what happens as a result of that. There are three stories, really, in Life is a Dream. There are three characters. That's why before I was saying one of the protagonists. Most of the time you have one protagonist, and that's actually what protagonist means. But you have several characters here whose story we see. We see obviously the story of Segismund. He is the main character, but we also have the story of King Basil. And last but not least, very importantly, we have the story of Rosaura. If you take the story of Rosaura, that story has to do with honor. So that's another theme, and it's a theme, by the way, that is present throughout Hispanic literature, throughout its history. It's one of those key things, not only in Spain, but also, of course, in Latin America. So what Rosaura wants to do is to take revenge on a character named Astolf, who promised that he would marry her, but now he's about to marry a woman named Estella. So you also have the theme of honor very prominently there through the story of Rosaura. And then also important is another dichotomy, which is reason versus passion, because Segismund is a very passionate character. So how he navigates that. Does he give way to passion, or does he let reason influence him? Is also very important as you read this play. But what I want to do, since we're talking about the themes, is to highlight the two themes that I believe are the most important, at least to me as a reader. And I think these are the themes that make the play relevant, or most relevant to us today. Now here's the first one. I would not hesitate at all to call Life is a Dream an example of 17th century paranoid fiction. Think about this. We have the character of Segismund who has trouble distinguishing between reality and fantasy. So how do we know that what we are living is in fact reality? This thing that is happening right now, you are watching this video very kindly, listening to me. How do you know that this is real and that it is not a dream? The fact is that there is no way to prove that something is real, that is not a dream, through empirical evidence. It's something that we just kind of accept through some kind of faith, if you want to call it that. So this play, if you ask me, is something like the 17th century equivalent of The Matrix because of that theme that is present right there. And I just find that fascinating. The other one, the other important theme that I wanted to mention that I think makes it very relevant to us is the concept of memory. So according to the play, or one of the things that the play suggests, is that memory is one of the things, maybe the most important one, that makes us the person that we are. Okay, so Segismund has his memory of his life as a prisoner at the beginning. And then when he becomes king, he thinks that that life as a prisoner was a dream. But then when he is taken back to the prison, he thinks that his moment as a king was a dream. So it's really closely related to the idea of, the paranoid fiction aspect of the play. But if you think about it, and I think of this in my personal case, there are many people who have my name. There are many people who have my nationality, my ethnicity, my religious views, political views, my profession, my age, things like that. But what makes me me is the sum of my experiences, right? And if I don't have the memory of the sum of those experiences, then who am I? If I lose that memory, I lose my identity, pretty much. And I think this is what makes this play fascinating, among other things. That theme of memory that so many of us are interested in. You can see this in literature, of course, but also in many important films, and films that have also stood the test of time. For example, the film Memento deals with the importance of memory and how crucial and how central it is to our concept of identity. And if you want to look at something maybe a little bit less serious, you can also look at films like 50 First Dates. There are many others also. And by the way, there is a very important Spanish film that was remade into an English film with Tom Cruise. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Abre los Ojos by Alejandro Amenábar. It was remade as Vanilla Sky. Many people have seen parallels between Vanilla Sky, Abre los Ojos, and the play by Calderón de la Barca, Life is a Dream. So you can see this is just exploding with very, very important themes. I want to tell you now a little bit about the English translation, which is published by Penguin. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The translator's name is Gregory Rax. And I'm going to read you a couple of things that he says on what guided his work as a translator, because I think this is going to give you a better idea on what kind of translation we have here than if I just tell you about it. So he points out in his note on the translation, the present translation of Calderón's masterpiece represents the first attempt to render the drama entirely in analogous meter and rhyme since 1853, when both Dennis Florence McCarthy and Edward Fitzgerald, with varying degrees of success, contemporaneously produced full-length English language versions of the play. And then he says about the language. The language of this translation has attempted to retain a hint of archaism without striving to sound pseudo-Shakespearean. So that tells you quite a bit about the approach that he followed. The meter in Spanish, as I told you before, we measure it in the number of syllables. You don't really do that in English. In English, you go by beats. So what the translator decided to do was, for example, when you had octosyllabic lines of poetry, he translated that into iambic tetrameter. And then for hendecasyllabic, 11 syllables, he did iambic pentameter. This is kind of like the equivalent for these two types of options that you may have. So I usually tell you, on the other hand, whenever you get the chance, if you're going to read something in Spanish, get the Cátedra edition. Guess what edition the English translation is based on? Cátedra edition. So the translator was following the advice of Jorge's Corner 15 years before Jorge's Corner even existed. So I think that is fantastic. I really enjoyed this translation. That is something that you always go very carefully into a work that is translated, especially if we're talking about poetry, especially if we're talking about a play that is from the 17th century. How is this going to translate? And I think in this case, the version that we have in English, I prefer to speak of versions, instead of translations. It's just amazing. I read it in record time. It was just, I started it in the afternoon and I continued to read and I was like, this is really enjoyable. Of course, it's not the same. I always say that. It's never going to be the same. That's a given. But it's really a very good version of Life is a Dream, or La vida es sueño in English. So I'm going to read you a couple of quotes, because that way you will get a taste of the translation and also of the kind of language and the kind of preoccupations that you can find in this play. The first one is about the beauty of women. This is one of the most famous passages, and it also inspired the title of a great favorite Argentine film of mine, which is Breve Cielo, or A Brief Heaven. Now here you don't have the phrase a brief heaven, but I'll show you what it's like. So after Sigismund gets out of the tower, the character of Clarion asks him, so, what was the most interesting thing that you have seen in this brave new world of human beings? So this is Clarion. He says, so which among the host of things you've seen today has pleased you most? And Sigismund answers, I wasn't much surprised by anything. All was as I'd surmised. But since you have inquired, the thing on earth that's most to be admired is woman's beauty. Mind me now, I'd read, while odiously confined, that out of all the creatures in his plan, God spent most time on that small cosmos, man. But this cannot be true, for woman is a slice of heaven too, and lovelier by far, as distant from male clay as earth from star. So that's on the beauty of women. And the other one that I wanted to share with you has to do precisely with the title of the play. So this is the moment that you become aware of what they mean fully by this title, Life is a Dream. So this is probably the most famous passage from this play. What's life? A frenzied, blurry haze. What's life? Not anything, it seems. A shadow. Fiction filling reams. All we possess on earth means nil, for life's a dream, think what you will, and even all our dreams are dreams. That is the most famous passage of the play. It happens at the very end of the second act. And I'm going to see if I can find it here so that I can read you that in Spanish and you can compare it. Here it is. ¿Qué es la vida? Un frenesí. ¿Qué es la vida? Una ilusión, una sombra, una ficción. Y el mayor bien es pequeño, que toda la vida es sueño, y los sueños sueños son. So that gives you some way to compare between the two versions. Bottom line, I'm going to read you something that Percy Shelley said about this play, so that you can have his opinion first as a bottom line, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. So Shelley said, I have read about 12 of Calderon's plays. Some of them certainly deserve to be ranked among the grandest and most perfect productions of the human mind. He exceeds all modern dramatists, with the exception of Shakespeare. We have to think about this. Shelley was reading this play in a language that was not his mother tongue. Maybe he would have thought something else regarding the comparison with Shakespeare right there. Now, it is the dramatist that most people cite as the equivalent of Shakespeare in Spanish is Lope de Vega. But I'm going to say this. I enjoyed reading La Vida es Sueño much more than I did reading some of Lope de Vega's works. And especially, for example, the one that is considered to be his masterpiece, or at least his most famous play in the Spanish-speaking world, which is Fuente Ovejuna. I enjoyed La Vida es Sueño much more. And I think that this play, Life is a Dream, deserves just as much attention as Shakespeare gets. So check it out, okay? I think you're going to find a lot here that's going to resonate with you. And I think you're going to be thrilled by the action and by the themes. So, and by the way, once again, as I said before, it's a very brief play. So it doesn't really take a lot of time to read it, and I think it's going to be a pleasant experience for you. So do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? I'm always here. I'm always happy to read and to reply. Those were my 2 cents on Pedro Calderón de la Barca's La Vida es Sueño, or Life is a Dream, a masterpiece of Spanish theater of the Golden Age. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.